Old rancher waited for his mail-order bride. A wild frontier woman with a gun walked off the train. The letter was in my shirt pocket when I drove the wagon to Caliant. Folded so many times the creases had gone white. I could have recited it word for word by then. I'd read it maybe 40 times since it came. But I kept it there anyway, against my chest, the way you keep a thing you're not sure about but can't put down either. Her name was Cecile Greer, widow out of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. 44 years old, she'd said, practical, not given to complaint. Could cook, could sew, could ride, had broken horses before her husband died. She'd written in a hand that didn't lean or curl, just went straight across the page like she was laying fence wire. I was 56. Running 900 acres out past the Loma Flats, mostly on my own since my hired man Tito got himself a wife in Belen and didn't come back. The house needed a woman. I didn't let myself think too hard about what I needed. I wrote to the agency in Santa Fe. The agency wrote back with Cecile Greer's particulars. I wrote to her. She wrote to me. 3 letters each, and we'd agreed she'd come. I had not slept particularly well in 9 years. That's the part I didn't put in my letters. The train was 40 minutes late. I stood on the platform in my good coat, the one I wore to funerals and the rare occasion someone in town got married, and watched the depot agent sweep the same stretch of boards 3 times. The mountains south of town still had snow on them even in May. I thought about going back to the wagon, and then didn't. When she stepped off, I knew her right away because she was the only woman who came off alone, and because she had a rifle. Not a pistol, a Winchester carbine, the short kind, carried in her left hand with the barrel pointed down the way a person carries a walking stick, easy and natural. She wore a dark green traveling dress and a brown hat, and she looked at the platform, looked at the mountains, looked at me. "Mr. Aldous Crane," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She put out her right hand, and I shook it. Her grip was dry and firm. "Cecile Greer," she said, "that's the last of my trunk." She nodded at the porter behind her. "You have a wagon." That was that. No performance, no display. She walked beside me to the wagon, and I put her trunk in the back, and she climbed up herself before I could offer. Set the rifle across her knees, pulled her hat down a 1/4 inch against the wind, and looked at the road ahead. We drove for a while without talking. The sage was silver in the afternoon light, and the road was hardpan, and the wagon creaked the way it always creaked. "You don't say much," she said finally. "No." "That's all right." She was quiet a moment. "I don't need a talker. My late husband was a talker, talked about everything he was going to do and did about 1/3 of it. You got the ranch going, that's something." I didn't answer that either. "You sleeping nights," she said. I looked at her. She was watching the road, same as before. "Some," I said. "Uh-huh." She pulled the rifle an inch further onto her knee. "We'll see." I didn't know what to make of her. I don't know what I'd expected. Someone more tentative, maybe. Someone who needed settling in. She didn't act like a woman who needed settling in. The ranch sat down a long, shallow draw, cottonwoods along the creek bed, the main house adobe with a porch that needed 2 of the boards replaced. I'd meant to do it before she came and hadn't gotten around to it. She looked at those boards when we pulled up and didn't say anything. Got down, picked up the carbine, and went inside. I unhitched the horses and put them up and went in after. She was standing in the kitchen looking at the stove. "It draws all right," she said. "Mostly. You got to leave the side damper a 1/4 open." She crouched down and opened the firebox door and looked in, then closed it. "I can work with that." She stood and turned around. "Where am I sleeping?" I'd put her in the room off the kitchen, smaller than the main bedroom, but it had its own window. I showed her. She set her bag on the bed and the carbine against the wall and turned around in the middle of the room once, taking it in. "Fine," she said. "I'll need a hook for the rifle. I'll put one in tomorrow." She nodded. That was the end of it. Supper she made from what she found in the kitchen, which wasn't a great deal. Cornmeal, some salt pork, dried beans she soaked fast in hot water. It was better than anything I'd cooked for myself in a long time. We sat at the table and ate, and she asked me about water rights, and I told her about the creek and the well, and she asked about the cattle count, and I told her that too. Business. That was all right with me. She didn't ask me anything I didn't want to answer. The first week she worked the way I worked, steady, quiet from first light on. She found what needed doing and did it. The porch boards she fixed herself, pulled the bad ones and replaced them from lumber I had stacked behind the barn. I came around the corner and found her on her knees with a hammer and said nothing, and she said nothing, and we both went on. She asked questions that mattered. She didn't ask questions that didn't. The second week she said, "You wake up at 3 in the morning and go outside." Every night. We were at breakfast. I had my coffee cup and I set it down. "I didn't know you noticed," I said. "I notice most things." She broke a piece of cornbread. "You don't have to tell me what it is, but I figured I should say so." I didn't tell her, not then. What I'd been carrying was 9 years old and I hadn't spoken it aloud to anyone. Not the sheriff, not the priest in Caliant when I went that one time, not Tito, not the bottle, which I'd tried for about a year and which hadn't helped. It lived in me the way a splinter lives under skin, not always sharp, but always there. There'd been 3 men, drifters, accused of rustling from a spread east of town. The rancher's foreman got up a party, maybe 15 men, maybe more, I'd lost count, and rode out and found those 3 drifters camped in a draw, and there wasn't any trial and there wasn't any sheriff because the sheriff was in El Paso. And by the time anyone said, "Wait, wait, wait," the ropes were already up. I said wait, once, maybe twice. Lund Bauer said it louder than I did, and then the horses were slapped and the 3 men were dead, and it turned out later that the rustling had been done by someone else entirely, and those 3 had nothing to do with it. I'd said wait maybe twice, and then I'd stood there. I thought about that at 3 in the morning, had for 9 years. The rancher's foreman moved to Colorado. Some of the other men from the party I still saw in Caliant sometimes, buying grain or standing in the street. We didn't speak of it. One of them, Harkett, I think, had taken to drinking badly. Another one had died, a horse, something stupid. I'd stayed on my land and worked and tried not to sleep and tried not to think too much about the face of the youngest of those 3 men, who hadn't been more than 20. That's what I didn't put in the letter to Cecil Greer. The 3rd week she asked me to ride out with her and look at the east fence, which she'd noticed was sagging in 2 places from the wagon road. We rode out in the early morning and she was right. The wire was down in a long section and I should have caught it before she did. We got down and started working it. We worked for a while and then she said, without looking up from the wire, "Whatever it is you're carrying, it's making you old before your time." I kept working. "I'm not asking you to tell me," she said. "I'm just saying I can see it." "Can you?" My voice came out flatter than I meant. "I've seen it before." She pulled the wire taut and held it while I got the staple. "My brother, he came back from the war. I don't mean the big war, I mean a little skirmish, a patrol that went wrong. 3 men died that he felt responsible for, and he spent about 10 years being half a person." She let go of the wire. "He came out of it eventually." "How?" "He talked about it, not to me, to his wife. Once he talked about it, he stopped carrying it alone." She moved down to the next low section. "That's all, that's the whole miracle." I didn't say anything the rest of the time we worked the fence. I told her on a Friday night. I don't know why Friday. She was at the table mending something, and I was at the other end with nothing in my hands, and I just started talking. I told her about the party and the draw and the 3 men and the ropes. I told her about saying wait maybe twice. I told her about the youngest one's face. I told her about standing there after. She mended while I talked, didn't stop, didn't look up until I was done. When I was done, she set the mending on the table and looked at me. "Were you armed?" she said. "Yes." "Would they have stopped if you'd drawn?" I thought about that. Probably not. 15 men with their blood up. "So you'd have died for it?" "Maybe." "And the 3 men would have died anyway?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "So you said wait twice to 15 men who weren't going to hear it, and when they didn't hear it, you didn't die heroically for nothing, and now you've been punishing yourself for 9 years for not doing the impossible." I didn't have an answer to that. "I'm not saying it wasn't terrible," she said. "I'm not saying you should feel nothing. I'm saying you've made yourself judge and jury for what you should have been able to do, and your sentence has been 9 years of 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't think you deserve that sentence." The lamp was between us on the table. I could see her face plain in it. "Those men are dead," she said. "You didn't put the ropes up. You said stop. And now you've been half alive for 9 years, and that doesn't bring them back, and it doesn't do you any good, and it doesn't do me any good either, since I came out here to build something with a man, not watch one disappear." She picked the mending back up. "That's all I have to say about it." I sat there for a while. "Cecile," I said. That's the first time anyone said that to me. She looked up at me over the mending. "Well," she said, "someone should have said it a long time ago." I won't pretend it was over after that. It wasn't. Some nights I still went outside at 3 o'clock. But I'd come back in, and sometimes she was up and had put the kettle on, and we'd sit at the table with our coffee and not talk much, and after a while I'd go back to bed. The youngest one's face didn't go away. I don't think it ever will. But it started to feel less like a thing eating me and more like a thing I carried, which is different. You can put down a thing you're carrying. A thing eating you, you can't. She was not a soft woman. She didn't say gentle things. She said true things, which is better. What she was steady. She didn't change her assessment of me after I told her. She didn't treat me like a broken thing. She worked beside me the same the next morning as she had the morning before, same stride, same eye on the fence line and the water and the sky. Like telling her had changed nothing, or had changed only this one thing, which was that she knew, and knowing it she'd decided to stay anyway, and that decision had already been made and didn't need to be remade every day. I'd expected something tentative when I sent to the agency. I'd gotten Cecile Greer, who was not tentative about anything. By June we'd mended most of what needed mending on the place. She planted a kitchen garden in a square patch beside the house, beans, squash, some peppers, and watered it every morning with methodical care. The hook for the rifle was beside her door, and she kept it there, same as ever. And I never asked her the story of it, and she never offered it. And I figured if she wanted me to know, she'd tell me the same way I'd told her, when she was ready. The letter came in July from Santa Fe. I almost didn't open it, didn't recognize the hand. When I did, I saw it was from a man named Garrett, who wrote that he'd been one of the party in the draw 9 years ago, and that he'd heard somehow. He didn't say how, that I was still out on the Loma Flats, and that he'd been wanting for a long time to write to someone who'd said stop that night, because nobody else he knew had said it, and he'd spent 9 years the same as me. And he didn't know what to do with that, and he just wanted to write to someone who might understand. I read it twice, then I showed it to Cecile. She read it and set it on the table and looked at it for a while. "You should write back," she said. "I know. You're not the only one who was there." "No." She slid the letter back to me. "Write tonight while you can." I did. I sat down after supper and wrote Garrett 3 pages, the longest letter I'd written since I couldn't remember. I told him what I remembered. I told him what I'd figured out, or what Cecile had said, and I'd slowly come to believe. I told him I didn't know if it helped, but he wasn't alone, and maybe that was worth something. She read it before I sealed it. She said it was good. There were things about her I learned slow. She didn't like thunder, not because it scared her, but because it reminded her of something she never told me. She had a picture of her late husband in her bag, and I saw it once by accident, and she closed the bag without comment, and I never mentioned it. She could shoot better than me, which she demonstrated one afternoon by hitting a fence post I couldn't hit at that distance. And she didn't rub it in, just handed me back my own rifle and said I should move my left thumb. I moved my left thumb and hit the post. She said, "There you go," and that was that. I didn't know, going to that depot, what I was waiting for. I thought I was waiting for someone to help with the cooking and the mending and the loneliness of the land at night. I didn't know I was waiting for someone to tell me the truth. The truth was simple, the way the truth usually is when you finally hear it out loud. I hadn't killed those men, I'd said stop. The 15 men hadn't listened, and the 3 men died, and it was a terrible thing, and it would always be a terrible thing. And I had carried it and would go on carrying it, but it was not going to carry me anymore. That was Cecile Greer's doing. Not by gentling me, not by telling me it wasn't so bad or that I was fine. By looking at it plain and saying, 9 years is enough. The garden came in well that fall. She put up the beans in jars, and the squash she kept in the root cellar, and the peppers she strung from a beam in the kitchen, and they dried red in the lamplight. The house smelled different, food and work, and someone there. I'd forgotten what that was like. One evening in October, I came in late from the cattle, and she had supper on, and the lamp burning and the peppers red overhead, and she looked up when I came through the door the same way she always did, steady and unhurried, and she said, "Wash up," and I washed up and we ate. After she sat with her coffee and I sat with mine, and we could hear the wind picking up outside, the first real cold wind of autumn, and the porch boards held, she'd done good work on those. And I thought about the letter I'd gotten from Garrett last week, which said he was some better, which said thank you. I thought about the youngest man's face, and it was there the same as always, the way it would always be. But Cecile was across the table with her coffee cup, and the peppers were red overhead, and the wind was outside, and I was inside. And there is a difference between a man who is finished and a man who is not finished yet. She looked at me over her cup, not like she was checking on me, more the way you look at something that is yours, not owned, but known. The way you look at a thing you have decided to stay with. Go to bed at a decent hour tonight, she said. I'll try, I said. Don't try, she set her cup down, just do it. I looked at her. After a moment I said, you're a hard woman, Cecile. She considered that. I've been called worse. She stood and picked up her cup. Come on, then. I got up. She was standing at the kitchen door waiting for me to come, and I walked over and she put one hand flat against my chest, not gentle or rough, just there, and looked up at me. You've been punishing yourself long enough, she said. One more time, like she wanted to make sure it had gone all the way in. I covered her hand with mine. I know it, I said. She nodded once, then she went on down the hall. I stood there a minute in the kitchen. The lamp, the red peppers, the sound of the wind. Then I turned the lamp down and went to bed. I slept until morning,